work for the Indiana Secondary Transition Resource Center, which is part of the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community in Bloomington. So I am blessed with the opportunity to talk about transition all the time. My history is as a secondary teacher, as well as a director of special ed. So it's kind of my heart and soul. So first of all, I want to hands, how many of you write transition IEPs currently? Yay! Okay, good. Some of this might be review to you, and it's kind of going to go lightning fast. I gave you a handout that we're going to use as examples, and the PowerPoint was emailed to you because there's a lot of probably additional information in there that I want you to be able to take back as a resource. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. Jot a note down and ask me questions afterwards. Transition has become such an important part of the planning process for our kids when they are 13, 14, all the way through age 22, that I hope that there's some information here that will help you feel more confident about what you're doing. To start with, I just want to talk about the purpose, because one of the things that I found over the last 20 years probably is transition is something that we have to buy into. We have to believe that it's very meaningful and intentional, that when our students are going to turn 14, we are really thinking long and hard about where is it they're trying to get to and what are we doing to try to help them. And sometimes that's jumping down a lot of rabbit holes, especially if you have 13 or 14-year-olds. You know, they all want to be NBA players and NFL players and YouTubers and video game designers, but that's okay. That's the natural progression of people learning what you can do, what you can't do, what your avocation should be versus your vocation. So it's really important that we know that the purpose of doing this is about supporting kids and families, because our families sometimes jump off a cliff when they leave education. My students turned 18 or they've turned 22 if they have more significant needs. Now what? So transition becomes very important in having those, again, intentional conversations about the future. It's also important because we are constantly helping kids make connection. Why stay in school? You face that all the time. Why am I here? Why should I be here? Why should I stay here? Why should I not just quit school? So a lot of what we do is about helping kids make the connections between what you're doing now is meaningful to what you might want to do sometime later, even if it doesn't seem like it. And transition is also about helping develop a coordinated set of activities. We're going to talk a lot about that today. Transition planning is so much more than me asking you where you want to live, what you want to do, and if you need an education. It's about helping you make an informed decision. And to do that, we have to provide you with some coordinated thoughts and activities so you can come to that end point yourself. Transition IEP, again, I'm sure I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just so you know, it starts the year the student's going to turn 14. And like Steve said, we're writing transition IEPs for 5th graders. And that is a way different beast than writing a transition IEP for a senior. So it starts the minute the student's going to hit that point in age or entering 9th grade. The other thing that's important is that it's not a piece of the IEP. Many years ago, we wrote an IEP and then we added a transition plan. It's everything about that IEP is focused on transition. So it is the entire document of what you're doing. It all cycles back around to saying, how does this fit in with where you want to go? Again, sometimes that's a looser connection than others, but the importance is IEPs are about bringing kids to the table. What is it I'm trying to help you learn to do? What is it that you need to do better to help you be more successful in your classes? What is it you need to do that will help you be more successful as an employee? So it is the entire document. It's also about, and I will talk about this constantly, having done transition for so many years, it's often about those meaningful conversations, and we get too hung up on the papers. So did I give you a survey? Did I do the right inventory? And we need to be capturing a lot of the authentic things that we're doing with kids, because I rarely sit down with a teacher, be it in public school or a charter school, that does not know their students. You know your kids. You've had 100 conversations with those kids. And transition is about all of that. What has been the outcome of those meaningful conversations? So again, to start, you got to buy into it. If you think it's an event that happens 2 weeks before my case conference, then that's what will happen. It will be an event. I'll shuffle some papers. I'll ask you some questions that I might have asked you the same ones last year. So you have to think about it as that year-round process of helping that student get to know themselves, their strengths, their needs, their preferences, their interests, even when they change every 5 minutes. But it's about helping them have those intentional conversations constantly. And it's also, and I don't have this up here, but it's very much about respectful conversations. There used to be this joke many years ago that we felt like in transition we were the dream crushers. You know, I want to be this, well, you can't. Or, you know, I want to be a vet, that's not possible. So it's really about, again, how do we help kids come to those conclusions without us being the ones to say, gosh, you can't do that. When we all decided what we wanted to do when we grew up, some of us came to that earlier than some of us later, but people allowed you to explore. Sometimes we don't let individuals with disabilities explore. We think they have to come to the realistic version of what I want to be when I'm 14 years old. There are probably people in this room that still haven't come to the realistic version of necessarily what you truly want to be, or you've not been able to get to that brass ring that you want to get to. So keep in mind, again, it's about kids, it's built upon what they want to do, and we're the facilitators of helping them navigate that path. Good so far? All right. So a couple years ago, when we started talking about transition, we used to have this huge flow chart. And it didn't really make sense because transition kind of ended at the flow chart. So we decided to make it more of a cyclical process. And we're just going to keep, you're going to keep seeing the slide pop back up between every element. But it's important to remember that we start in the upper left, always with what we know. What are the present levels of that student? And then we cycle around and we come back around the next year and say, what did we learn about the present levels of that student during that school year or that IEP year? So again, we're going to go through each of these today. So the first one, top left, present levels and progress monitoring data. I just want to blush over it because we just don't have enough time, but keep in mind that if we consider the entire IEP a transition IEP, the data we gather is critically important on what your future is going to be, at least for the next 12 months of the next IEP. So progress monitoring data, again, making sure you know where that student's at right now. Where that comes to be really helpful is, I want to be a veterinarian, but my GPA is a 1.2, and I've had 32 absences, and I've got all of these behavior referrals and all these other things. It's not about saying you can't do that, but it's about helping a kid recognize to have that kind of a job, I have to have this kind of a skill set. And one of those skill sets is showing up. And another one of those skill sets is being willing to work hard and to go to school longer. So again, you may feel like you're talking till you're blue in your face, and you probably will be, but it's about, again, making that connection between what's happening now and where it is I want to get to. Along with that are present levels of academic and functional performance. And this has always been one of my mantras, we got to tell a better story. I don't care that Steve's a nice boy. What I care about, I care, Steve, that you're a nice boy. But what I care about is, what are Steve's strengths and his needs and what's happening now in his classrooms? Because that helps me talk him through where I want to get to and what's happening now. Kids, especially those of you that have 6th, 7th, 8th graders, they're clueless. They're too busy with raging hormones to think about where I'm going to go next. So we really have to start to help them understand why this present level of what you've done this past year becomes critically important. So make sure here that you're just telling a good story. Who is this student? If they come to my classroom, will I understand who they are and what they're capable of doing and what their needs are? Other stuff in there that you can look at on your PowerPoint, but present levels should be rich with data. It should be rich with what's the information say. That's what leads to good measurable annual goals. Everybody always wants to do a big sigh when we say measurable annual goals, but it's what helps me write a good measurable annual goal. If I only know that you're not passing a class, I don't have a lot of information to write your measurable annual goal. So make sure that you get enough data and enough specifics in there that the goal should then write itself for the following year. So IEPs in general are about front loading, so make sure you're front loading those present levels of performance because that becomes critically important. And these are just some things that can be in there or should be in there. Questions on present levels? No? Okay. You have at your table, or you should have, an example. And this is not a full transition IEP in any way, shape, or form. It's elements. So I chose one, and you have the elements. But basically, this is an example of how an IEP aligns itself. And that we're going to talk a lot about alignment. So everything throughout the IEP is like this fine little thread woven, and it all connects back to what we talked about before. So there's a present level there for one. Doesn't mean yours look exactly like that, but I read a lot of IEPs. I read about, I don't know, 1,000 a year probably, and a lot of them have 2 or 3 sentences in present level. So again, make sure you get some rich information. So the example there is just to set the stage for who Juan is, because the rest of the transition IEP is going to dig deeper into what Juan wants to do and how we're going to get him there. But we have to start with where he's at right now. Any questions on progress monitoring or present level? Feel pretty good about that? Okay, awesome. So the next piece is actually kind of the present levels of transition and the areas of transition. So we're going to move on now to age-appropriate transition assessments. And this is something that the state has really improved on, but now we're trying to make them a little bit more meaningful. So what happens at this point is that we have to do every year some type of an assessment that gathers data about education and training and employment. Those are mandatory every single year. We do transition assessments for independent living when that student's going to turn 14. If that student shows age-appropriate independent living skills, and it's the belief that with natural supports he's going to grow into that information, meaning I don't expect an 8th grader to know how to use a credit card, and I don't expect him to understand interest in buying a house. So if they're going to grow into that, you do not have to keep reassessing for independent living. Okay, so you don't have to do that year after year. However, you have to be flexible enough that if that student's mom was picking out their clothes when they were in 7th grade, and mom's still doing it when they're a junior in high school, that there might be a gap in independent living skills. So it's about being flexible, but at the same time, don't make more work for yourself. If that student is making independent living growth and you are seeing that, and you have documented that with an initial assessment, you don't have to keep reassessing that. You can revisit it, you can add to it. Maybe I had great independent living skills, and then I got a part-time job, and then I joined a club, and then I, paid for my own insurance, whatever it is. You can add to that, but you continue with that statement of that initial response of, I did not need an independent living assessment to be conducted again. Does that make sense? Everybody clear on that?
There's a box that you have to
Yes.
get to fill out.
Yeah, you have to.
Put in that box and say he continues to show age-appropriate skills.
Great question.
Based on our observations.
Great question. Actually, what you can do with that site evidence box is the first year you do it, you can't just say Joni has age-appropriate independent living skills. You have to say, based upon this assessment given on this date, I showed this, 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 and this. Now, from that point forward, you really can just copy and paste that cited evidence. And then you can add to it if you want, but you don't have to redo it, because what happens is, if we get rid of the dates of the assessments above, nobody knows if that student moves when that assessment was given. So it's important to make that site evidence box, and I think I have one in the example, make that site evidence box self-standing and kind of that quick summary of what you found out, and then you can just leave it there. You don't have to keep redoing it, which to me, again, is a good time saver. So we are going to do these assessments, and the important thing is that the assessments are supposed to be building upon what we already knew. So to your point, when I'm a 7th or 8th grader, it's fine to give me assessments like Dream Sheet and Career Clueless and things that are just basic information to make me start thinking about, oh shoot, I gotta think about what I'm gonna do when I'm an adult. But they should progress every year. So if Is that mine? No. If I've said since I was 5 years old I want to be a fireman, you don't keep reassessing necessarily, do you want to be a fireman? You help me now on the path of what does it take to be a fireman? So I can explore, what are the qualifications I have to have? What kind of training in school do I have to have? You can have me talk to a fireman. But it's about kind of saying I start with these paper, pencil, interest inventories, preference types of things, narrow down what I like. But when I then determine something I want to do, it's about giving me some meaningful activities that can become my assessments to help me determine if that's what I want to do or not. I'm going to give you an example. I had a student many years ago who just wanted to be a tattoo artist. Well, back then that was not as cool as it is today. And every year we'd sort of say, but what's plan B? What's plan B? What's plan B? So he would reluctantly give us plan B. But what we didn't do 20-some years ago is we didn't say, gosh, let's take art classes. Let's go look and see what it takes to be a tattoo artist. Let's see if you have the skill set. Do you like needles and blood? Because if you don't, that might be a problem. So what happened is that kid went through 4 years where we kept talking about plan B, but we didn't assess or allow him to show us if he had the skills to be a tattoo artist. Probably a year ago, I hear Mrs. S being screamed across the back of Kroger's, and it's my young man Cody who wanted to be a tattoo artist, and he's loping down, because he's a big kid, loping down the back of the grocery store, completely tatted up, and guess what Cody does for a living? He's a tattoo artist. It gives me goosebumps when I tell that story because I felt like I failed him because I didn't listen. But he did offer to give me a free tattoo, which I declined. And I could have gotten a free tattoo out of that. But at the same time, if I knew then what I know now, I would have helped him explore being a tattoo artist so he could find out whether or not that truly was the right path for him or not. I really didn't do that for him. Fortunately, he was able to follow that. I always had a lot of kids with emotional disabilities who wanted to go in the military. So instead, and again, sometimes they had medical conditions which would have kept them out of the military, but more often than not, they didn't even like me telling them what to do, so I couldn't imagine a drill sergeant. So again, how do we take those kids, let them talk to military recruiters, let them see what keeps you out of the military, what gets you into the military? That's really what the intention of assessments. It's not necessarily about, you can still give as many paper pencil things as you want. I'm not saying that you can't do that, but the intentionality of it and the meaningfulness of it comes about from those conversations of, I, Frank, respect what you want to do, so let's find out more about that. And when Frank finds out that it takes 4 more years of school, he says, oh, I hate school now. I don't want 4 more years of school. What else could I do? So it's kind of about helping kids narrow down those types of things. So assessments happen every year. They always have to address education and training and employment. They have to have the initial assessment for independent living. We talked about that. Okay, so how do you know then what to assess? What you think about is letting the kid guide those assessments. So I am really pretty groovy with 6th, 7th, 8th graders, you kind of having that pool of information that you need to get from kids. There's a lot of preference inventories and indicators. Help me find out, do I like to work at day or night? Do I want to work with people or by myself? Basic things that kids start to have kind of an opinion about. How many of you use the transition assessment matrix that's online? Okay, so that was created by a group of teachers and facilitated through the group I work with. We keep adding assessments. We've added a lot of authentic assessments. So if you have kids that take a career class, do any of you take career classes, or do you have career stuff embedded in your classes? Okay, so if you gather information from those types of activities and those types of things in your classes, those can become authentic assessments, meaning it didn't have to be something I got off a website. Now, can you have, I know what you were kind of talking about, kind of a sequence of here's what's good. You can. There are things that are good for certain age levels. I hate it when I see student dream sheet being, that's a strong word, I really don't like it. When I see student dream sheet being given to a junior, because it's really basic, and we need to be, if not, we need to be pushing for some deeper questions. If I really have no inclination about what I want to do, asking me the questions on the student dream sheet as a junior aren't going to give you new information. So kind of think about it when you choose what assessments you use. Think about whether or not it's going to produce new information. Okay? A couple years ago, I interviewed a bunch of juniors and seniors in a co-op that I had been working with. Their number one complaint was that everybody keeps asking me the same question over and over and over again. So think about that path. Ask meaningful things, assess meaningful areas so you can help kids move forward, even if you don't believe in the path that they're going on, because it's not our path, it's theirs. So if you are intentional, they're supposed to be individualized, so again, it should be the path I'm on. So again, if I want to go to college, and I've told you I want to be a teacher, then you should be helping me explore where can I get a degree in teaching? How far away from home can I be? Can I do a virtual tour online? Can I talk to a teacher? Do I know how much money I'll make? So think about, and there are a lot of really good assessments for that. Think about what's going to help me make the decision about where I want to go. Right now, the state of employment for individuals with disabilities is not great. So we are not getting the outcomes that we hope. We're not getting kids that are really walking out and getting jobs that they want. So I firmly believe in the process of this because I think it will help us get kids at least closer to that, closer to that goal. And you know what? If you have a kid that wants to work at Dollar General, which I do have one young man I'm working with right now, it is okay. So what we've explored about Dollar General is there room for growth? Is there any management potential? What kind of job is it that you want? Come to find out, he wants the job because it's a walking distance from his house and he doesn't think he'll ever be able to afford a car. Not a bad goal at all. However, somebody wanted to change that goal for him because I didn't think it was high enough. So again, follow the path that your kids are leading you on and help ask the right questions that will get you new information. So I can't give you that there's a certain 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. However, I don't think that it's impossible for you guys to decide within your team at school, here's some ones that we think are really get good information that we want as a 7th and 8th grader. Or here's an independent living one assessment that gives really good information about where a student is at. So you can have, I have preferences, you'll have preferences. How many middle school people here? Okay, Virginia Career View, and it's in the resources, but it is the most awesome exploration site there is. So if you don't take anything else away from today, I hope you do, but if you don't, Virginia Career View has some amazing types of things for kids, and it leads them down all kinds of great paths. There's even one for unusual jobs. They can get on and see what a storm chaser does, because I guarantee you after the hurricanes there's going to be a surge of kids that want to be storm chasers, and we see that happen all the time. And I can get on and I can actually learn about storm chasing. Again, doesn't mean that's going to be my job, but I might really be interested in that. We don't just want our kids to be employed. We want them to have a full, meaningful life. So what other things can I learn about that are going to help me? Okay, this is the link to the Transition Assessment Matrix, so if you have not used it, please try it. This site is great because it lets you break it down by what grade level. So I can put that I want junior and senior level assessments, and teachers went through and said, we think these are most appropriate for upper level students, so that is a great one. We're going to talk in a second about authentic assessments, because I think upper high school level is where we should be doing less paper pencil and more what's happening in life or what's happening in your other classes. But there are some good ones on here as well. If you Google transition assessments, you'll get everything and anything. We try to keep pulling into this resource ones that you can sort. So I can say I'm looking for employment for a student with a learning disability or other health impairment in, 11th and 12th grade. So it's a good sorter. Okay, so authentic. I want to talk just for a second about that. So authentic assessments. Not everything that you get from students is going to be paper pencil, and that's okay. The more authentic the assessment is, the richer the information probably is. So this is where you capture what's already happening. So if Jimmy Joe Bob has a job at the BP, and he gets an evaluation from his employer, have him bring that evaluation in. What a great employment assessment. He's always on time. He's always dressed appropriately. He's polite to customers. Because what often you find out is that's not the kid you know at school. He knows how to up the game when he's on a job site. You might have a class again. I might be taking a fax class, or I might be taking a tech class that is in my area of interest. So what's already happening, or what can we make happen that is helping me make a better or a more informed decision about my future? So I just want to take 2 seconds. I'm not going to pull some up because I'm going to show you, but how many of you do things in your schools right now that you think give you authentic information about a student in the areas of employment, education, training, or independent living? How many of you think things happen? So you find out in those career readiness lesson plans what pieces are going to give you good information. Did that student have to look up careers? Did they have to do interest inventories already? Because I'm sure they did. Did they have to go out and do a job shadow or an interview of somebody? Anything you can grab. Talk to your English teacher and ask if you can have them do an essay on the job. What job every student is looking for. It's good for all kids, not just students with disabilities. So figure out ways that you can integrate it into your curriculum and things that might be available there that you can not make more work for yourself, but do more intentional work. Okay? In your examples, I guess I can set that down since I'm standing still. Let's look for a second. So on page 2, for one, it's going to show the assessments that were given. Couple things there. You can leave those year after year. That's your choice or your school's choice. You can have a list of every assessment a kid's been given since they turned 14, or you can wipe them out every year. So the system lets you do whatever. But you can put each year, or you can. I like this part. I like seeing the built upon years, because then I know that we're not giving students the same types of assessments every year. Then below that, so here's what happens after I give that assessment. I have to give a summary of findings. What did I find out? And here's my rule of thumb there, is that if I can only write one sentence, it was not a very thorough assessment. So what did I find out that I didn't already know, or to help build upon the story of that student in their path forward? All right, so we summarize those findings. Okay, I think that's one area that we tend to not do as well as we could. We tend to put really simple things, and it's about what did I find out from that assessment that helps me understand that student's strengths, preference, needs, where they want to go to better. All right, so next, we talked about that. There's your example. So we've done present levels. We've talked about transition assessments. Transition assessments then drive post-secondary goal statements. So if you look at your example even already, you're going to have those post-secondary goal statements. These are where we have the I will statements. And it doesn't mean I will what that student necessarily shoots out of their mouth. It's what information did we gather from the assessments along with conversations with that student that help lead to what is my post-secondary outcome. Now, a couple of caveats here is that, again, you always have to address employment, education, and training. If you've determined that I don't need an independent living post-secondary goal, which is probably the case for most of your students, then you cite that, and then you can keep copying and pasting that like we talked about. A couple things to remember about this is that should be alignment. We're talking about now that thread. So if up here I said constantly, I don't want to go to college, I'm not interested in, working with people, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, and then we see an I will statement that's totally opposite of that, it loses alignment of why did we write this statement. So you can always, in your summary of findings, say that even though I gave Frank this assessment in November, we didn't have his conference until January, and by then he'd changed his mind. So even though my assessment said that, you can put other pieces of information in that summary of findings. So this was done here, now he's had an experience here, and he's really interested in construction. So he moved his cheese, and again, we allow kids to move their cheese. But that statement should align back to information that's in that summary of findings. All right? So use the drop-down words Make sure that they make sense. Don't add a bunch of extra stuff because we don't need all the extraneous details. All of the information qualifying why you made that I will statement should be up in your summary of findings. Okay? So that summary of findings is kind of that big picture. Now it led to, here's what I want to do. Another thing here to remember is that in your I will statements, it's my brass ring goal. So if I want to go to college, it's not really about me working part-time while I go to college. It's about what is it I want to do when I finish. It's kind of, I don't want to say misleading, but yes, a little misleading, because it says after high school. So allow yourself to think after high school. So think about post-school in general. So if I'm going to go to college to do something and I want to be a computer programmer, go ahead and put the I will statement that I'll be a computer programmer. It's not wrong if you do it otherwise, but if we think about it logically, we're not helping the kid get a part-time job. We want to help them understand that long-term goal that they're trying to get to. So it's not a wrong thing. That's why it's not up here. But it's a best practice type of thing to say it's about my long-term goal. So we have some examples for Juan on his I will statements. So I want to pause for a second. Questions. We've gone through present levels, transition assessments, summary of findings, post-secondary goals. Are you feeling pretty good about where you're at and your understanding of this? Okay, great. So after that, we're down at the bottom, measurable annual goals. And this is the one that people struggle with because remember, it just has to align to my long-term goal. There's not necessarily going to be this direct connection from my written language goal, but there's usually a loose connection. If I have a written language goal and I want to go into some kind of a professional job, written language is going to be important. If I have a behavioral goal because I have behavioral issues, then we know that that's going to be important in my long-term goal. So this is where we're just deciding what supports that next step. Measurable annual goals, again, have to go back to your present levels. So go back and revisit what you know or get on the Indiana IEP Resource Center site because they have tons of great information. But just to remember, it's about skill-based. What can I do in that period of time? Do I have criteria to measure whether or not the student's meeting that goal? And again, is it helping me make educational and behavioral progress? So goal writing, I think, is probably the #1 thing that people struggle with. So here's a couple things to remember while you're doing that. You don't have to write a goal for every single thing you do. You have to write a goal that addresses the most significant barriers that a student is demonstrating that are keeping them from making progress. So it's not about, okay, if I finish this goal, I've got 8 more. That's just professional courtesy. We know you're going to keep building on your goals. But it's about what is it that's going to, I always say it's the biggest bang for your buck goal. What is going to help that student make the most progress? What can I teach them to help move them forward? For some kids, it may just be learning to understand themselves and advocate for their needs. For some of your kids, it might just be identifying resources that I need to utilize. So look and see what got that student in the special ed door to begin with, and what is keeping them from making the most significant amount of progress that they can out in general education. So keeping that in mind. And remember, you have to know where you started to know where you want to get to. That's where your data in progress monitoring and present level becomes really important. So again, other things has to be able to be monitored. The last one is always what I use when I monitor IEPs, and I say, if I walked into your classroom and I saw Sally, would I understand what it is you're wanting Sally to do? So what does that look like? That's just broken down. Let's look at a couple of examples here. So there are some examples for written language and reading comprehension, and the examples are there because I want us to keep in mind that measurable annual goals are not hopeful outcomes. It's not about passing my class. It's not about turning in 85% of my assignments. It's not about passing the ECA. It's not about getting my diploma. Those are the hopeful outcomes that we want. It's about what skills do I need to get there. So we sometimes get a little bit hung up on what I want to say, what we know we want kids to accomplish. I want you to graduate from high school. I want you to get a diploma. I want you to pass this test. But If they could do that, they would. They were identified as a student with a disability for other reasons. So looking at what is it that's keeping me from coming to school? What skills do I need to turn in more assignments? What do I need to advocate for myself better? And I like the way that the Indiana IEP has embedded now specially designed instruction, because specially designed instruction should write your goal for you. Instead of saying need, which is kind of like, oh, I'm blaming Steve again that he's not able to do this because we talked about it in present levels, specially designed instruction says, I know that this student has trouble writing and staying on topic. Specially designed instruction says, what do we know as educators? What are we going to do to impact my ability to do that? And that's that skill-based process that we're going to need to embed in that goal. So sometimes we make goals much harder than they need to be. Think about your kids. Think about what they're doing. Think about the skill they need to be more successful. And then that becomes your measurable annual goal. Questions about that? Yes?
Should the goal statements include like a utilization strategy, for example, having a highlight strip, using a proofreading guide? Does it have to have, like, with the help of blank, Johnny will?
Doesn't have to, but if you say something like using reading strategies, and I don't say what that might look like, somebody else can't come in and mimic that. You could put a couple things in parentheses, so maybe you're going to teach me to use context clues, and you're going to teach me to, look at bold-faced words and italicized print. But try to narrow it down, because remember that goals are about us teaching our kids something. So if I could have improved my reading comprehension, or if I could have embedded my own strategies, I would have done that as a student. But I haven't, so I need you to show me which ones I can use. So it might be given a choice of strategies, and then you find out at the end, which one did I like? And then the next year's teacher knows that this strategy was effective for me. Does that make sense? Great question. Any other questions? Goals trip everybody up, but again, step back and go back to the basics of what you know about your kids. When I sit with teachers, I do a lot of coaching. When I sit with teachers, they write the best goals talking to me, and then they get to the IEP, and then I think they worry too much about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and then they lose the intentionality of their goals. All right. So we are all the way to the bottom. We've written good present levels of performance. We've assessed in areas of transition what our students want to do, what their strengths and preferences are. We've written their post-secondary goals with them, so they've said, yes, I want to be a welder. We've got annual goals. The last piece is my favorite. Transition services and activities. And I'm going to give you a hint. If you can get intentional and meaningful with transition services and activities, they can easily become your assessments. So then you don't have to pencil paper or before a conference come up with assessments. So here's what transition services and activities should have in them. They should take place during the year we wrote the IEP. So it's not what I did last year or what I hope to do 3 years from now. It's what's going to happen in the next 12 months. They have to support every area I wrote a post-secondary goal for. So if you did not write an independent living I will statement, you don't need transition services and activities to align to that. And oftentimes, one transition services and activity aligns to employment and education training. So it's not like you have to always have a separate one for each one. It has to be supported in that by whom statement. It can't just say the student's going to do it. Even though you may not be taking them on that college campus visit, or you may not be taking them to the career fair, a TOR or a teacher or support staff needs to be in there, because we're at least going to help inform when those things or how those things can take place. So that's a real compliance issue, so make sure that you'll always have school personnel. And again, it can just say school personnel. It doesn't have to. And please don't ever use your name. If you use your name and you leave, then you have to rewrite all those IEPs. So it's just teachers or guidance or whoever it is that might support that activity. It is going to help that student, again, back to our initial conversation, those transition services and activities are intended to not be one size fits all. I read a lot of McDonald's transition services and activities, and that's over 1 billion served. Everybody gets the same activity and service. It doesn't matter how old I am. It doesn't matter if it's appropriate or if it has anything to do with my outcomes. So here's where we want to make sure that we are thinking individually, even though you will use many of them over again. We'll explain how you do that. Individually, what did that student tell me? What activity and service can I do that will help them, by the time we have the next ACR at some point, decide, am I on the right path? Do I still want to do this? Or do I really want to move my cheese now that I found out a little more? I decided it's not really kind of where I want to go. So, individualized and meaningful. Try to find out if there are things happening in your school. If there aren't, maybe there are some things you can support happening in your school. You might have a class that brings in career visitors. They might bring in a lawyer and a cosmetologist and somebody else into an econ class or into some other kind of class. If you can help your kids identify what about those jobs they liked or didn't like, what a great service and activity, because now sometimes services and activities are about narrowing down, throwing out what I don't want to do, not just about finding out what I do want to do. Okay? So here are some examples, and these are more authentic. Now I will tell you, it is minimally compliant to say that you're going to do more assessments. But if you think about the conversation we're having, it's not very meaningful. Okay? It's not the intentionality. So in those boxes, and you can kind of look at wands, the narrative is your best friend. So the narrative allows me to understand why you chose that activity. So you could have an activity for a student that and maybe your whole 8th grade's going to go on college campus visits, because I find out that's kind of an 8th grade thing now. Maybe you're going to go on a college campus visit, but that student has continually said, I don't want to go to college. If the narrative explains that nobody in Joni's family has gone to college, she's not had the opportunity to be on a college campus, so you want her to at least see what it looks like and feels like. Because sometimes kids, well, not sometimes, all the times kids only know what they know. So opening their eyes to things that they haven't explored yet is okay. So use that narrative to kind of explain if there's not that good alignment back to my post-secondary goal that I write, because there's lots of things that we do that help kids move forward. For that student who's still a 10th grader and has no clue, if you're going to do something very specific in an interest inventory, use the narrative to say, even though Joni has done this, this, and this over the last several years, she's still unclear about what her long-term goal is. So here's what we're going to do to try to make it clearer. We're not going to repeat what we did before, but we're going to do something different to help her see. So sometimes things are general. That narrative lets you know why and how it looks like. It also helps you if you do something as a school. So if a school has an activity that everybody participates in. So if you have a career class or you have an advisory period where everybody participates in college and career planning, the narrative lets you say, what about it do I need? So I can have the same activity, but the narrative could be totally different for 3 different students, because why I need to do it is different than why you need to do it. You know, I'm already pretty clear about what I'm going to make when I become a poet, and so 10 minutes, Steve's telling me. So I don't. Thank you. So I don't necessarily need to go have that activity for the same reason, but somebody else who thinks they want to be this has no idea that it's not going to pay the bills, and I'm not going to be able to have rent money, and I'm not going to support a family. So use that narrative to really specify why that student's doing that service and activity. So here are just some different ones. In the transition assessment matrix, if you do an activity and you can capture it, then next year you cycle it back around to be your assessment. So if I had you meet with a military recruiter, because you keep talking about going into the military, or there's even an assessment on there about things I know about the military, which is kind of a hoot when you have kids fill it out. But if you have them do that, or you sit down and you process what they learned from that, you give them 5 questions to come back and talk to you about. If you do that and you can capture that on paper, next year, your transition assessment might be my interview with a military recruiter. And the summary says, Joni had the opportunity to talk to a military recruiter. Here's what she found out. She found out she has no control over her life in basic training. She found out she's going to have to move away from home, that she's not sure what she's going to be able to do. And why do we do that? Because at the end of the day, at the end of that next IEP, what question is it that we want to ask our student? Do you still want to do that? Is that still the path you want to be on? Because now we can respectfully allow them to bow out of that path. Okay, you found out some things you didn't know about, and now you don't want to do that. That's fine. We'll go over here. Or it can really help fuel a student, like I did that. Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. But what we're doing is we're helping them make, and this is, if I could post this in everybody's secondary classroom, it would be the words informed decisions. That we are helping kids make informed decisions, because it's really what transition planning is about. It's about that informed decision making. And you know what? If I make the informed decision to never work, it's an informed decision, but make sure I understand what that means. Make sure I understand what I'm going to be able to do, not be able to do that with that. Make sure I understand that money may not always be there, or this may not always be the path for me. It's not about saying you have to have this. It's about saying this is what you want. How can I better inform you about what that looks like? I'm sure you have thousands of examples, but again, that's number one question I get. What about the kid who doesn't want to do anything? Then help them be better informed about what they are going to do, and what that's going to look like, and what that's going to allow them and not allow them. Bring somebody in to help with that information. Doesn't mean you quit trying to push, everybody can be employed, but sometimes our goals are not our kids' goals, and we sort of have to somehow make peace with that. So I want you to look at Juan's transition services and activities, and they kind of go back to, and I made this one a little different because he was a student who wasn't personally taking responsibility for his medication. So again, how would that impact Juan in a job, in life, in any kind of further education? Astronomically, and you know those kids. So it's okay that this activity and service was, we've got to help him do a better job with self-monitoring his own medication. And then again, the other one is he wanted to be a conservation officer, so how am I going to explore that a little bit more to see what it takes? So again, the alignment goes all the way back to who is Juan initially in present levels of performance in our age-appropriate transition assessments. And now it went through the entire IEP, which is why it is a transition IEP in that whole document. Okay, questions? I have some resources on the end for you. So I'm going to tell you about them real quick, and then I think we have a few minutes if you have questions to ask. So if you do not, how many of you get Tuesday's tips? Oh, yay. Thank you. Okay, if you do not, it is a great resource. Do you guys agree, not agree? Thumbs up. Okay, so Tuesday's tips, every Tuesday, the center I work for sends things out. There's sometimes assessments, there's sometimes new information about what's happening, clarification about things, resources for you to go to. But it's so easy, and if you don't want them, just delete them when they come through. I just stick mine in a file so I can go back and look for things. So that's on the top. The first is our website, and there's lots of information there. The second one is a transition matrix, and then there's some other resources down there. The Indiana IEP Resource Center, again, if you're struggling with goal writing, make sure that you get on there. There's great tutorials and a lot of great information. And then some other things. We are putting out very soon a transition guide for new teachers, so it's going to have a lot of things embedded in there if you feel like you're new to that process, and some other resources you can use. Okay, I think Steve's saying I'm done, but my email is on there. I truly, sincerely, and Steve will tell you this, want you to email me. If you need things, if you have questions, if you're looking for something that you can't find, please let me know, and we will help you navigate the system to get there.